On the day of my retirement, my daughter sneered. Now that you've stopped working, you might as well die. Or, only good for money, old hag. I cancelled every card, erased my name from their assets, and disappeared. The note I left at her door made her cry. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. But let me start from the beginning, because that wasn't how I thought my 45 years as a nurse would end. I had planned a small celebration at my house. Nothing fancy, just cake and coffee for a few close friends from the hospital. At 68, I felt proud of what I'd accomplished. 4 decades of night shifts, emergency rooms, holding hands with dying patients, comforting families in their worst moments. I'd saved lives, delivered babies, been there when people needed someone most. Jessica arrived an hour late as usual. She walked in, wearing that expensive coat I'd bought her last Christmas, the one that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her husband Brian followed behind, checking his phone instead of greeting anyone. They both had that look they always wore when they visited me, like they were enduring something unpleasant. "Mom, we can't stay long," Jessica said, not bothering to hug me. "Brian has that conference call with Tokyo." I'd learned not to expect much from these visits. Jessica was busy with her marketing job, Brian with his real estate business. They had important lives, important people to see. I understood that. At least I told myself I understood. My friend Margaret from the cardiac unit was telling everyone about my dedication, how I'd never missed a shift, even when I was sick. Linda never thought about herself first, she said, always putting others before her own needs. That's when Jessica laughed. Not a happy laugh, but something sharp and bitter. "Oh, that sounds like Mom. Always the martyr." The room went quiet. Other friends shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. I felt heat rising to my cheeks, but I tried to smooth things over the way I always did. "Jessica's just joking," I said quickly. She wasn't done. When Margaret mentioned my pension and how I could finally relax and travel, Jessica's expression changed completely. Her face twisted into something I barely recognized. "Travel? With what money?" Jessica's voice got louder. "Do you people know how much her pension actually is? It's pathetic. Barely covers her medications in that tiny house." I stared at my daughter, my heart starting to race the way it did during medical emergencies. But this felt worse than any code blue I'd ever responded to. "Jessica, please," I whispered. She turned to face me directly, and what I saw in her eyes made my blood freeze. Pure contempt. Like I was something disgusting she'd found stuck to her shoe. "Now that you've stopped working, you might as well die. You're only good for money, you old hag." The words hit me like a physical blow. Actually took a step backward, my hand finding the wall for support. The room was completely silent now. My friends looked horrified. Even Brian looked up from his phone, his face pale. "Jessica," Margaret said sharply. "That's your mother. My mother, who hasn't contributed anything meaningful to this family in years." Jessica shot back. "Do you know what it's like having everyone ask why your mother still lives in that dump? Why she dresses like she shops at thrift stores? She embarrasses us everywhere we go." I felt something breaking inside my chest. Not my heart exactly, but something deeper. Something that had been holding me together for years. "Honey," I started. But she cut me off. "Don't honey me. I'm tired of pretending. You're anything more than a burden. At least when you were working you had some use. Now you're just another old woman taking up space." The words kept coming, each one landing like a scalpel. How I was an embarrassment at family gatherings. How my small house made them look bad. How they had to make excuses for me to their friends. How she wished I would just disappear so they could move on with their lives without having to worry about the poor old mother situation. My friends started making excuses to leave. Within 10 minutes, my retirement celebration was over. The cake sat untouched on the table. The coffee grew cold. My achievements, my decades of service, my entire career reduced to nothing by my own daughter's cruelty. After everyone left, I sat alone in my living room, still wearing the navy dress I'd bought specially for today. The house felt different somehow, smaller, emptier, like all the air had been sucked out of it. Jessica and Brian had left without saying goodbye, without apologizing, without even seeming to notice what they'd done. But I noticed everything. I noticed how Jessica's voice had changed when she talked about money. How her eyes had lit up with something ugly when Margaret mentioned my pension. How she'd calculated exactly what my retirement meant to her financially. I noticed that she'd said old hag with the same tone someone might use to discuss garbage pickup. Most importantly, I noticed that this wasn't the first time. Looking back, through years of memories, I could see the pattern. Every visit, every phone call, every family gathering had been about what I could provide. Money for Jessica's down payment. Money for Brian's business expansion. Money for vacations, clothes, cars, private schools for the grandchildren I barely knew. When was the last time Jessica had called just to ask how I was feeling? When was the last time she'd shown any interest in my life, my thoughts, my dreams? When was the last time she'd said she loved me without following it with a request for financial help? Couldn't remember. And that realization was worse than anything she'd said today. I walked to my bedroom and sat on the bed where I'd spent countless nights planning how to help my family, how to stretch my nurse's salary to cover their emergencies, how to make sure Jessica had everything she needed to succeed in life. The bed where I'd lost sleep, worrying about their problems, their happiness, their future. On my nightstand was a photo of Jessica's wedding day. I'd paid for the dress, the flowers, the reception. She looked beautiful and happy. I looked proud and hopeful. We both looked like different people. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark thinking about everything Jessica had said and everything she hadn't said. About the daughter I'd raised and the stranger she'd become. About the life I'd built and how little it seemed to matter to the people who should have mattered most. But mostly, I thought about the look in her eyes when she told me I should die. There was no anger there, no heat of the moment regret, just cold calculation, like she'd been thinking it for a long time and finally found the courage to say it out loud. By morning, I knew what I had to do. The morning after my retirement party, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. My hands were still shaking, not from age but from the shock of what had happened. Jessica's words kept replaying in my mind like a broken record. You're only good for money, you old hag. I'd always prided myself on being organized. 45 years in nursing teaches you to keep detailed records, to pay attention to patterns, to notice when something isn't right. So I decided to do what I did best: investigate. I pulled out my filing cabinet and spread my financial records across the dining room table. Bank statements, credit card bills, receipts, check stubs, everything I'd meticulously saved over the years, the way my mother had taught me. Always keep your papers, Linda, she used to. You never know when you'll need them. What I found made my stomach turn. The pattern was there, clear as day once I started looking for it. Every major expense in Jessica and Brian's life over the past 15 years had been funded by me. Their house down payment $40,000 from my savings. Brian's business startup costs $25,000. Jessica's MBA program $35,000. Grandchildren's private school tuition won $200 a month for the past 3 years. But it wasn't just the big expenses. There were smaller things too. Things I'd forgotten about or dismissed as normal family support. Car repairs, medical bills, vacation deposits, credit card payments when they'd overspent. Always accompanied by the same story. Temporary setback, unexpected expense. Just until we get back on our feet. I found a folder I'd labeled emergency fund that was now completely empty. Money I'd saved for my own emergencies, for home repairs, for medical expenses. All gone to their various crises. And I found something that made me sit down hard in my chair. A credit card statement from last month, a card I'd given Jessica 3 years ago for emergencies only. The balance was $8,000, but the charges weren't for emergencies. Designer handbags, expensive restaurants, a weekend spa retreat, jewelry, clothes, hundreds of dollars spent at stores I'd never even heard of. I called the credit card company with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. Mrs. Davidson, yes, we show 3 authorized users on your account. You, Jessica Davidson Miller, and Brian Miller. The account has been quite active this year. How active? Well, you personally haven't used the card in 8 months, but the other users have charged approximately $15,000 this year. $15,000 on my credit card. Money that would come out of my already modest pension. Can you tell me what the charges were for? The representative read through a list that made me feel sick. Expensive dinners, shopping, breeze, hotel stays, airline tickets. While I was eating soup and crackers for dinner to make my grocery money last. They were living like royalty on my dime. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. Then I started making more phone calls. My bank confirmed that Jessica was listed as a joint account holder on my savings account with full access to withdraw funds. She'd been making regular withdrawals for months, always just under the amount that would trigger a notification to me. My insurance company told me that both Jessica and Brian were listed as beneficiaries on my life insurance policy, which Jessica had convinced me to update 2 years ago for estate planning purposes. The mortgage company confirmed that I'd been listed as a co-signer on Jessica and Brian's house loan, making me liable if they defaulted. Each phone call revealed another layer of financial entanglement. I barely remembered agreeing to. Jessica had been so persuasive, so loving when she asked. Just a formality, Mom. Just to make things easier, just temporary, just in case. Thought about all the time she'd visited over the past few years. How she always asked about my finances, my accounts, my passwords. Just making sure you're managing okay, Mom. Your age, it's important to have help with these things. I'd been flattered. My successful, educated daughter wanted to help me navigate the complicated world of modern banking. I felt grateful, not suspicious. Now I realize she hadn't been helping me at all. She'd been helping herself. That afternoon, I drove to Jessica's house for the first time in months. It was in the expensive part of town, the kind of neighborhood I'd never dreamed of affording on a nurse's salary. The house was beautiful with perfect landscaping and 2 luxury cars in the driveway. I didn't knock. Instead, I sat in my old Honda across the street and watched. Jessica came home from work in her BMW talking on her phone. Through the window, I could see her laughing, animated, happy. She looked nothing like the cruel woman who'd humiliated me yesterday. Brian arrived an hour later. They stood in their driveway talking, and I could see them clearly. They looked prosperous, successful, content. They looked like people who had everything they wanted in life. And they did have everything they wanted because I'd given it to them. Two grandchildren, Emma and Michael, ran out to greet their parents. Beautiful, well-dressed children who barely knew me existed. When was the last time they'd visited me? When was the last time Jessica had brought them by or invited me to their school plays or asked if I wanted to spend time with them? I couldn't remember that either. I watched my family's perfect life unfold in front of their perfect house, bought with my money, maintained with my credit cards, secured with my signature. I finally understood what Jessica had meant yesterday. I wasn't their mother and grandmother. I was their financial institution, a resource to be managed and exploited, not a person to be loved and respected. The cruelest part was how good they'd gotten at it. How Jessica could call me with tears in her voice, talking about unexpected expenses and temporary hardships. How Brian could shake his head sadly and talk about the burden of raising children in such an expensive world. How they could make me feel grateful to be able to help, honored to be included in their lives, necessary to their happiness. But I'd never been necessary to their happiness. I'd only been necessary to their lifestyle. I thought about all the nights I'd worked double shifts to save money for their emergencies. All the vacations I'd skipped, clothes I'd gone without, repairs I'd postponed. All the times I'd chosen their comfort over my own, their wants over my needs. And what did I have to show for it? A daughter who called me a worthless old hag. Son-in-law who couldn't be bothered to look up from his phone during my retirement party. Grandchildren who treated me like a stranger. I started the car and drove home as the sun was setting. My small house looked even smaller after seeing their mansion. My old furniture looked shabbier. My simple life looked pathetic. But for the first time in years, I wasn't ashamed of what I had. I was ashamed of what I'd given away. That night I made a list. Not of what I'd lost, but of what I could still control. My pension, my remaining savings, my credit cards, my house, my signature on their loans, my name on their accounts. Jessica had been right about one thing yesterday. Now that I'd stopped working, things were going to change, just not the way she expected. I'd always been methodical. In nursing, you learn that careful planning saves lives. You check medications twice, follow procedures exactly, document everything. Mistakes can be fatal. Now, as I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by financial documents, I applied that same precision to my own situation. The first thing I did was change all my passwords, banking, credit cards, insurance, everything. Jessica had insisted on knowing them all for emergencies. But I realized now that the only emergency had been her need for my money. Then I called my credit card companies one by one. I need to remove the authorized users from my accounts. I told each customer service representative. May I ask why, Mrs. Davidson? I'm simplifying my finances. It wasn't a lie. I was simplifying them by removing the people who were draining them dry. The process took hours, but by the end of the day, Jessica and Brian no longer had access to any of my credit cards. $15,000 in charges they'd made without my knowledge would be there. Next, I visited my bank. Patricia, the manager who'd known me for 20 years, smiled warmly when I walked in. Linda, how does it feel to be retired? Liberating, I said, and meant it more than she could know. I need to make some changes to my accounts. I removed Jessica as a joint account holder. changed my account numbers, and set up new passwords and security questions. I also arranged for all statements to be sent electronically to a new email address that only I knew. Are you sure about this? Patricia asked, looking concerned. Jessica has been helping you manage these accounts for years. Exactly the problem, I replied. The hardest part was dealing with the co-signed loans. I couldn't simply remove my name without Jessica and Brian's cooperation, but I could document everything for future reference. I requested copies of all loan documents and payment histories. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. They were 3 months behind on their mortgage payments. My perfect credit score was being destroyed by their financial irresponsibility, and I'd had no idea. The bank had been sending notices to their address, not mine, so I'd never seen the warnings. I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer for the following week. Margaret had given me the name of someone who specialized in elder financial abuse. Elder abuse, she'd called it. The phrase made me wheeze. But I was beginning to understand that's exactly what this was. That evening Jessica called. Her voice was tight with barely controlled panic. Mom, there's something wrong with your credit card. It was declined when I tried to use it today. Which card? I asked, even though I knew the answer. The emergency card. The one you gave me for emergencies. What was the emergency? Silence. Then I was buying groceries. I'd seen the credit card statements. She hadn't used that card for groceries in months. The last charge had been at an expensive boutique downtown. Jessica, that card had $8,000 in charges on it from the past few months. None of them looked like emergencies to me. Mom, we can explain all of that. Some of those charges were complicated. Look, can you just call the credit card company and fix whatever's wrong? I removed you and Brian as authorized users. The silence stretched so long, I thought the call had been dropped. Then Jessica's voice came back. Different now. Harder. You did what? I removed your access to my credit cards. All of them. Mom, you can't do that. We have expenses. We have obligations. Michael's school tuition is due next week. Then I suggest you pay it with your own money. Our own money. Jessica's voice rose. Mom, you know our situation. Brian's business is still recovering from the recession. My salary barely covers our basic expenses. Our basic expenses. I thought about their 2 luxury cars, their 5-bedroom house, their country club membership, their annual vacations to Europe, basic expenses. Jessica, I've been reviewing my financial records. Do you want to know what I found? Mom, this isn't the time for. In the past 5 years I've given you and Brian over $150,000. That's not counting the money you've charged on my credit cards or the loan I co-signed for your house. Silence. $150,000, Jessica. That's more than I made in 5 years when I first started nursing. And yesterday you told me I was worthless, that I should die because I'm only good for money. I was upset. I didn't mean you meant every word. And you were right. To you, I am only good for money. But here's the thing. If that's all I am, then you don't get the money and you don't get me. I hung up before she could respond. Within an hour, Brian called. His voice was smooth, reasonable, the tone he used when he was trying to sell someone something. Linda, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Jessica is upset and I think maybe some wires got crossed. No wires got crossed. Brian, I understand the situation perfectly. Look, I know Jessica said some things. She didn't mean yesterday. She was stressed about work, and you know how she gets when she's under pressure. Long has she been under pressure? Because according to my records, you've been taking money from me for 15 years. Taking is a strong word. We've always been grateful for your help and we've always intended to pay you back. When were you planning to pay me back? Because I don't see any payments in my records. No interest, no repayment. Schedule, no acknowledgement that any of this was ever a loan. Brian cleared his throat. We thought of it more as family support. You know, the kind of help parents give their children. Parents who are respected and loved by their children. Not parents who are called worthless old hags. Linda, please. Jessica didn't mean that. Then she can tell me herself. But first she can explain why she's been withdrawing money from my savings account without telling me. She can explain why my credit score is being destroyed by your late mortgage payments. She can explain why I've been co-signing loans I didn't even know existed. I don't know what you're talking about. Then you'd better figure it out because as of today the bank of Linda Davidson is permanently closed. I hung up on him too. The phone rang 6 more times that evening. I didn't answer. I was done being available for their emergencies, their explanations, their manipulations. Instead, I sat in my living room with a notepad making plans. Real plans, not the wishful thinking I'd been calling plans for years. I calculated my actual financial situation without their drain on my resources. My pension wasn't generous, but it was adequate for a modest lifestyle. Without their mortgage, their credit cards, their constant emergencies, I could live comfortably. More importantly, I could live independently. I thought about where I wanted to spend my remaining years. Not in this house which held too many memories of being used and dismissed. Not in this town where everyone knew me as Jessica's mother, the nurse who'd worked all those years to support her ungrateful family. I wanted to go somewhere no one knew my story. Somewhere I could be Linda Davidson, not Linda the doormat, Linda the ATM, Linda the burden. I'd always loved the ocean. As a child, my family had vacationed at a small coastal town 3 hours north. Remembered walking on the beach at sunrise, feeling like the world was full of possibilities. I hadn't felt that way in decades. I spent the evening researching small coastal towns within driving distance, places where I could afford a modest apartment, where I could volunteer at local hospitals or clinics, where I could build a life based on who I was, not what I could provide to others. The next morning I called a real estate agent. I'm looking to sell my house quickly, I told her. And I'm looking to relocate to the coast. Any particular reason for the move? Thought about how to answer that. Because my daughter told me I should die. Because I've been financially abused for 15 years, because I need to disappear before I lose what's left of my dignity. I'm starting a new chapter, I said instead, and I want a clean break from the old one. That afternoon, I drove through the town I'd called home for 40 years, seeing it with new eyes. Every street corner held memories of rushing to help Jessica with some crisis. Every store reminded me of something I'd bought for her family instead of myself. Every familiar face belonged to someone who'd witnessed my gradual transformation from independent woman to family ATM. I was ready to leave it all behind. But first I had one more task to complete, the most important one of all. Day morning at 7 o'clock. I'd chosen that time deliberately, knowing Jessica wouldn't be awake and Brian would already be at his office. I didn't want witnesses to my departure. Didn't want to deal with last-minute guilt trips or desperate promises they'd never intend to keep. And spent 2 weeks preparing for this moment with the same meticulous care I'd once used to prepare surgical patients. Every detail planned, every contingency considered, every loose end tied up. The coastal town I'd chosen was called Harbor Point. Population 8,000. Small enough that I could disappear. Large enough that I wouldn't feel isolated. I'd rented a one-bedroom apartment site, unseen, based only on photos and a video call with a landlord. It was modest but clean, with a view of the harbor from the kitchen window. More importantly, it was 200 m away from Jessica and Brian. The realtor had been amazed at how quickly my house sold. "The market is hot right now," she'd explained. "But this is still unusual. You priced it very competitively." I'd priced it to sell fast, not to maximize profit. I wanted out more than I wanted money. After paying off my remaining mortgage and the realtor's commission, I'd cleared enough to buy a reliable used car and put a substantial amount in savings. Money that would be mine alone for the first time in decades. The moving crew worked efficiently, loading my furniture into their truck. I was surprised by how little I actually owned. 40 years in this house, and everything I truly cared about fit into a single truck with room to spare. As they loaded my bedroom set, I watched from the kitchen window. Jessica's house was visible in the distance, a monument to my financial sacrifice. The irony wasn't lost on me that my life savings had built them a mansion while I lived in a modest ranch house that was falling apart. The crew chief approached me with his clipboard. "That's everything, ma'am. We'll have you unloaded in Harbor Point by 5 o'clock. I nodded, taking one last look around the tea house. The walls showed pale rectangles where family photos had hung. Photos of Jessica's wedding, the grandchildren's school pictures, family vacations I'd paid for but hadn't been invited on. I'd left most of those pictures behind. They belonged to a different life, a different version of myself. The only photo I'd kept was an old one of my mother and me, taken when I graduated nursing school. We both looked so hopeful in that picture, so proud. My mother had worked 2 jobs to help me through school, just like I'd later worked extra shifts to help Jessica through hers. But there was a crucial difference. I had loved and respected my mother. I had never called her worthless or suggested she should die. Before leaving, I had one final task. I walked to Jessica's front door and taped an envelope to it, sealed with her name written in my careful handwriting. Inside was a letter I'd spent days writing, editing, perfecting. It said everything I needed to say and nothing I would regret. The walk back to my car felt different, lighter, somehow like I was shedding years of accumulated weight with each step. I drove out of town without looking back. The apartment in Harbor Point was perfect for my needs. Small but comfortable, with hardwood floors and windows that let in plenty of light. The kitchen was tiny but efficient. The bedroom was just large enough for my bed and dresser. Most importantly, it was mine. Well, co-signers, no joint accounts, no authorized users, just my name on the lease, my security deposit, my responsibility. The landlord, George Peterson, was a retired fisherman in his 70s. He helped me carry boxes upstairs, refusing to let me pay the movers extra for the service. "Welcome to Harbor Point," he said as we finished. "It's a quiet place. Good for people who want to be left alone, but friendly when you're ready for company." That sounded perfect. That evening, I sat in my new living room with a cup of tea, watching the sun set over the harbor through my kitchen window. Fishing boats were returning from their day at sea, their lights twinkling in the gathering darkness. The sound of gulls and lapping water was more peaceful than anything I'd heard in years. My phone had been buzzing all day. 17 missed calls from Jessica, 11 from Brian. I'd turned off the ringer hours ago. Eventually, they'd have to find the envelope. I wondered what they were thinking right now. But they noticed the moving truck. Had they tried to call me at home? Had they driven by to see the for sale sign in my front yard, now bearing a bright red sold banner? I imagined Jessica's panic when she realized what was happening. The frantic calls to the bank only to discover she no longer had access to my accounts. The desperate attempt to use credit cards that would be declined. The growing understanding that their financial safety net had disappeared. More than that, I imagined their shock at discovering I was capable of leaving. For 15 years I'd been their reliable, constant, always available, always helpful, always there to bail them out of whatever crisis they'd created. I'd been so predictable, so manageable, so easily taken for granted. They'd probably assumed I'd forgive Jessica's cruel words the way I'd forgiven everything else over the years. Few tears, a half-hearted apology, maybe some flowers, and life would return to normal. The Bank of Linda Davidson would reopen for business, but there would be no forgiveness this time. No second chances, no benefit of the doubt, no turning the other cheek. At 9 o'clock my phone rang. Jessica's number. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to her message. Her voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Not the confident, dismissive tone she usually used with me, but something desperate and frightened. "Mom, where are you? I went by the house. And there's a sold sign in the yard. Your neighbor said she saw a moving truck. Please call me back. We need to. I know you're upset about what I said, but we can work this out. Please, Mom. I'm scared." She was scared. Woman who told me I should die because I was worthless was now scared because her source of easy money had vanished. Deleted the message and turned off my phone. The next few days passed quietly. I unpacked my belongings, arranged my furniture, learned the layout of my new town. Harbor Point had a small hospital where I inquired about volunteer opportunities. The director, a woman named Sarah, was delighted to meet me. "We desperately need experienced nurses," she told me. "Even as volunteers, would you be interested in working with our hospice patients?" I would be very interested. Taking care of people in their final days had always been the most meaningful part of my career. Being present for families during their most difficult moments, providing comfort and dignity when medical cures were no longer possible. "I'd love that," I told Sarah. "When can I start?" By the end of my first week in Harbor Point, I'd established a routine. Volunteer shifts at the hospital 3 days a week, walks along the harbor in the evenings, groceries at the small market where everyone seemed to know everyone else. People were friendly but not intrusive, welcoming but not pushy. Nobody knew my history. Nobody knew about Jessica or Brian or the years of financial abuse. I was just Linda Davidson, retired nurse. New in town. Felt like being reborn. My phone continued to ring regularly. Jessica, Brian, even numbers I didn't recognize. I'd blocked their calls, but they kept trying from different phones. I never answered, never listened to the voicemails. There was nothing they could say that would change anything. Exactly 1 week after I'd moved, Jessica appeared at my old house. My former neighbor, Mrs. Chen, called to tell me, "Linda dear, there's a young woman at your old house. She's been there for hours crying on the front porch. She says she's your daughter. The new owners haven't moved in yet, so there's no one to help her." Should I call someone? "That's Jessica," I told her. "Don't worry about her. We'll figure out what to do." But she seems so upset. She keeps saying she needs to find you. That there's been some terrible misunderstanding. There had been no misunderstanding. Jessica had shown me exactly who she was, and I'd finally believed her. Mrs. Chen, Jessica is an adult. She can take care of herself. You don't need to get involved. After I hung up, I sat on my small balcony overlooking the harbor, thinking about Jessica sitting on the front porch of my old house, finally reading the letter I'd left for her. The letter that explained everything. The letter I'd left for Jessica contained 15 pages of meticulous documentation. Every loan I'd co-signed, every emergency payment I'd made, every credit card charge, every withdrawal from my accounts, 15 years of financial exploitation laid out in black and white with dates, amounts, and bank records to support every claim. But the numbers were only part of it. The rest of the letter detailed something more painful: the slow erosion of our relationship, the gradual transformation from loving mother and daughter to ATM and user. I'd written about the Christmas when 8-year-old Emma had asked why Grandma Linda never came to their house anymore. Jessica's response, which I'd overheard from the kitchen: Grandma's house is more comfortable for her. She doesn't really fit in with our friends. I'd written about Michael's 10th birthday party, which I'd paid for but wasn't invited to attend. Really more of a kid's thing, Jessica had explained. You understand. I'd understood that she was ashamed of me in front of the other parents. I'd written about the family vacation to Disney World that I'd funded but wasn't included in the graduation parties, the holiday celebrations, the milestone moments I'd financed from the sidelines while being systematically excluded from the actual memories. Most importantly, I'd written about the pattern of emotional manipulation that had made it all possible. The tears, the emergencies, the guilt trips, the promises that were never kept. The way Jessica could make me feel selfish for wanting to keep any money for myself. Ungrateful for questioning her constant need for financial help. The letter ended with a simple statement. You told me I was only good for money. I've decided to take you at your word. I'm no longer providing money. There's no longer any reason for us to have a relationship. 3 weeks after I'd moved to Harbor Point, Mrs. Chen called again. Linda, I'm sorry to bother you, but there's something I think you should. Well, your daughter has been by the house several times, and yesterday she had a big argument with someone on the phone. She was screaming about money and lawyers and saying terrible things about you. I wasn't surprised. I'd been wondering when the financial reality would fully hit them. She also left something for you, Mrs. Chen continued. A manila envelope. Should I mail it to you? Just throw it away, I told her. Had no interest in whatever Jessica was trying to send me, but Mrs. Chen was persistent. She seemed desperate. Linda, maybe you should at least look at it. Against my better judgment, I agreed to let her mail it. It arrived 2 days later, containing a packet of legal documents that made my blood boil. Jessica and Brian were suing me for financial elder abuse and demanding I return all the money they claimed I'd stolen from them. According to their lawsuit, I'd manipulated them into taking loans they couldn't afford, then maliciously withdrawn my support to damage their credit and force them into financial hardship. They were claiming I'd suffered some kind of mental breakdown that made me unable to manage my finances responsibly. They wanted a court to declare me incompetent and appoint Jessica as my financial guardian. The audacity was breathtaking. After 15 years of bleeding me dry, they were now claiming to be my victims. Called the lawyer Margaret had recommended, a sharp woman named Catherine Reynolds, who specialized in elder financial abuse cases. This is quite something, Catherine said after reviewing their lawsuit. Essentially arguing that you financially abused yourself by stopping them from financially abusing you. Can they win? Not a chance. You have documentation going back 15 years showing exactly who was taking money from whom. Plus, the fact that you were competent enough to organize your move, sell your house, and establish yourself in a new town pretty clearly contradicts their claims about your mental capacity. Catherine agreed to represent me, and within a week, she'd filed a countersuit documenting the actual financial abuse I suffered. The evidence was overwhelming. $200,000 in direct payments, loans, and credit card charges over 15 years with no repayment, and no acknowledgement that any of it constituted debt. But the legal battle was only part of Jessica and Brian's problems. Without my financial support, their carefully constructed life was collapsing faster than I'd anticipated. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard fragments of what was happening. Brian's real estate business, which had been struggling for years, finally failed completely. He'd been using my co-signed loans to keep it afloat, and without that safety net, his creditors moved quickly to collect. Jessica had been forced to take a second job waitressing at night to make ends meet. The woman, who'd been too embarrassed to be seen with me, was now serving tables at a chain restaurant. They'd put their house on the market, but they owed more than it was worth. The proceeds from selling wouldn't be enough to pay off their debts, especially with 3 months of missed mortgage payments dragging down their credit scores. The country club membership had been cancelled. Luxury cars had been repossessed. Emma and Michael had been transferred to public schools. My grandchildren were experiencing real consequences for their parents' actions for the first time in their lives. Part of me felt guilty about that, but I reminded myself that I wasn't the one who'd created this situation. I'd simply stopped enabling. Then 4 weeks after I'd moved, Jessica found me. I was walking along the harbor after my volunteer shift at the hospital when I saw her sitting on a bench near the pier. She looked terrible, thin, exhausted, aged beyond her years. Her expensive clothes had been replaced by jeans and a worn sweater. Her perfectly styled hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize my own daughter. She stood when she saw me approaching, her face a mixture of hope and desperation. Her voice cracked on the word. "I've been looking for you for weeks." I stopped walking but didn't. "Come closer." "How did you find me?" "I hired a private investigator. It cost money we don't have, but I had to find." Tears were streaming down her face. "Mom, please. We need to talk." "Talk?" "At my retirement party. You made your feelings perfectly clear. I was wrong. I was so wrong, and I'm sorry. I was stressed and angry, and I said things I didn't mean." "Which things didn't you mean?" "That I should die. I'm only good for money. That I'm a worthless old hag." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "All of it. None of it. I don't know. I was just frustrated about money and took it out on you." "So, you do think I'm only good for money?" "No, that's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean, Jessica? Use your words carefully, because this is probably the last conversation we'll ever have." She sank back onto the bench, sobbing. "I meant that I was scared. We've been struggling financially for years, and I knew you were retiring, and I panicked about what that would mean for us." "What it would mean for you is that you'd have to live within your own means, support your own family, make your own choices, and face your own consequences. But we can't. We're drowning, Mom. Without your help, we're going to lose everything. You never had anything. You had my things, bought with my money, secured with my credit. Now you'll have to build your own life with your own resources. I don't know how to do that." Her honesty was startling. 42 years old, my daughter had never learned to manage money, to live within a budget, to make financial sacrifices. I'd shielded her from all of that by absorbing every crisis, funding every want, smoothing every rough patch. Then it's time you learned. Mom, please. I know I hurt you, but I'm your daughter. Or family. Family helps each other. Family respects each other. Family loves each other. Family doesn't call each other worthless old hags. I apologized for that. Well, you explained it. There's a difference. Jessica stood up again, her desperation turning to anger. So this is it. You're going to destroy our family because I said some stupid things when I was upset. I didn't destroy anything, Jessica. I simply stopped funding it. Same thing. And there it was. The truth. We'd been dancing around for 15 years. In Jessica's mind, our family relationship was purely transactional. Without my money, there was no family. You're right, I said quietly. It is the same thing which tells you everything you need to know about what our family actually was. I started walking away, but she called after me. Wait, please. If you won't help us financially, will you at least drop the lawsuit? We can't afford lawyers. We're going to lose everything anyway. I turned back to face her one last time. You should have thought of that before. You decided I was expendable. As I walked away, I heard her sobbing behind me. Part of me wanted to comfort her the way I'd comforted her through every childhood disappointment, every teenage heartbreak, every adult crisis. But that part of me had died the day she told me I should die. 6 months after I disappeared from my old life. I was sitting in the Harbor Point Community Center, teaching a CPR class to local residents. My students were a diverse group. Young mothers, retired fishermen, shop owners, teenagers working there. First jobs, all of them eager to learn, grateful for my expertise, respectful of my knowledge. It struck me that in 6 months, these near strangers had shown me more genuine appreciation than my own family had in 15 years. Remember, I told the class as they practiced chest compressions on the training dummies, the most important thing is to start immediately. Don't worry about doing it perfectly. Doing something is always better than doing nothing. The irony of those words wasn't lost on me. For years, I'd done nothing while Jessica and Brian slowly drained my finances and my dignity. I told myself I was being patient, understanding, loving. In reality, I'd been enabling their abuse by refusing to set boundaries. After class, a woman named Dorothy approached me. She was about my age with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a practical bun. Linda, that was wonderful. I feel so much more confident now about handling emergencies. Paused, studying my face. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you seem different from when you first moved here. Happier. She was right. I did feel different. Lighter somehow, like I'd been carrying a heavy weight for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. I'm finding my footing, I told her. It's been an adjustment, but a good one. Dorothy nodded knowingly. Sometimes we have to lose everything to find ourselves. I hadn't lost everything, though. I'd lost Jessica and Brian and the grandchildren. And I barely knew. I'd lost the illusion of a loving family and the burden of being their ATM, but what I'd gained was worth so much more. That evening I sat on my small balcony overlooking the harbor, reviewing the latest report from Catherine, my lawyer. The countersuit against Jessica and Brian was proceeding smoothly. Their own lawsuit had been dismissed with prejudice, meaning they couldn't file it again. More importantly, they'd been ordered to pay my legal fees. They're in complete financial freefall. Catherine had told me during our last phone call. Their lawyers dropped them when they couldn't pay their bills. They're representing themselves now, which is about as effective as you'd expect. I'd also received updates from Mrs. Chen, who still checked on the old house periodically. The new owners were a young couple with 2 small children, and they'd already made improvements I could never have afforded. Fresh paint, new landscaping, a playground in the backyard. The house looked loved in a way it never had when I lived there. Jessica and Brian had moved into a small rental apartment across town. Both were working multiple jobs to make ends meet. The children had adjusted to their new school, according to Mrs. Chen, though Emma had asked several neighbors if they knew how to contact Grandma Linda. That information hit me harder than I'd expected. Emma was only 10 years old. She didn't understand the adult complications that had torn our family apart. For her, I'd simply vanished from her life without explanation. For a moment I considered reaching out to her, writing a letter, sending a card, something to let her know I still thought about her. But then I remembered how Jessica had systematically excluded me from Emma's life long before our final confrontation. How many school plays, birthday parties, and milestone moments I'd missed because Jessica found me embarrassing. How Emma had been taught to see me as an obligation rather than a beloved grandmother. If I contacted Emma now, Jessica would use it as leverage. She'd manipulate the situation, use her daughter's emotions as weapons, try to guilt me back into my old role as family item. Emma deserved better than to be caught in the middle of that manipulation. So I stayed away. It was one of the hardest decisions I'd ever made, but I knew it was the right one. My new life in Harbor Point had settled into a comfortable routine. 3 days a week, I volunteered at the hospital, working primarily with hospice patients and their families. The work was emotionally demanding but deeply satisfying. There's something profound about being present with people during their final journey, helping them find peace and dignity in their last days. The other days I kept busy with community activities. I joined a book club that met at the library every Tuesday. I'd started volunteering at the local food bank on Saturdays. I'd even begun taking watercolor painting classes at the community center. For the first time in decades, I was living for myself, making choices based on what I wanted to do, not what someone else needed me to provide. My small apartment had become a sanctuary. I decorated it with things I loved. Soft blue curtains that reminded me of the ocean. Plants that thrived in the sunny windows. Books I'd always meant to read but never had time for. Photos of my parents. Nursing school graduation. My years at the hospital. Memories from before Jessica's needs consumed my entire identity. I'd also made friends. Real friends, not people who tolerated me 'cause I was useful to them. Dorothy from the CPR class had become a regular companion for morning walks along the pier. George, my landlord, often stopped by to check on things and stayed for coffee and conversation. Sarah from the hospital had invited me to several staff social events, treating me like a valued colleague despite my volunteer status. These people knew me as Linda Davidson, retired nurse, community volunteer, watercolor enthusiast. They had no idea about my previous life as the family ATM. To them, I was simply myself, and that was enough. 1 year after moving to Harbor Point, I received an unexpected visitor. I was tending to the small herb garden I'd planted on my balcony when I heard footsteps on the stairs outside my apartment. A knock at the door revealed a young man I barely recognized. Michael, my grandson, 17 years old now. Tall and serious looking, with eyes that reminded me of my father. Grandma Linda. His voice was deeper than I remembered but uncertain. Michael, I stood frozen in my doorway, unsure what to feel. What are you doing here? I needed to find you to talk to you. He looked around nervously. Can I come in? I hesitated, then stepped aside. He entered my small apartment, looking around with curious eyes. This is nice, he said, seeming genuinely surprised. It's peaceful. How did you find me? Same private investigator Mom used. I've been saving money from my job for months. He sat down on my couch, his adult height making my furniture look smaller. Turned 18 last month. Mom doesn't know I'm here. I sat across from him, studying his face. He looked older than his years with a weariness that broke my heart. Why did you want to find me? Michael was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. When he spoke, his words were measured and mature. Because I figured out what really happened between you and Mom and Dad. I mean, I was 15 when you left, not 5. I could see what was going on. What did you see? I saw how they treated you, how they only called you when they needed money, how they talked about you when you weren't around. He looked down at his hands. I saw Mom charge thousands of dollars on your credit cards for things we didn't need. I saw Dad stress about mortgage payments while buying expensive toys for himself. And then I saw you working extra shifts at the hospital when you should have been retired. Also, they could live beyond their means. He met my eyes directly. I also heard what Mom said to you at your retirement party about how you should die because you're only good for money. The memory still stung even after all this time. I'm sorry you had to hear that. Sorry I didn't say anything. I should have stood up for you. You were a child, Michael. It wasn't your responsibility. Maybe not then, but I'm not a child anymore. He leaned forward intently. Grandma, I want you to know that I never felt that way about you. Even when I was little, I knew you loved us. Really loved us. Not just what you could give us. Tears I'd been holding back for months started falling. I remember when you taught me to tie my shoes, Michael continued. You must have shown me 50. And you never got impatient. And when I broke my arm when I was 8, you came to the hospital and stayed with me all night because Mom and Dad were at some party. I did remember that. Jessica had been furious about missing their dinner reservations. I remember all of it, Grandma. The bedtime stories, the help with homework, the way you always asked about school and actually listened to the answers. You were the only adult who seemed to think what I had to say mattered. Did matter. You always mattered to me. No. That's why I had to find you. He reached into his backpack and pulled out an envelope. This is for you. Inside was a handwritten letter, several pages long, and a check for $500. Michael, I can't take your money. It's not my money. It's yours. His voice was firm. I calculated everything I could remember Mom and Dad taking from you over the years. Just the big stuff I knew about. That check represents what I can afford to pay back right now from my job at the grocery store. I stared at the check, overwhelmed. I know it's not much compared to what they took, but I'm going to keep paying you back every month until I've returned everything with interest. Michael, you don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. They stole from you, and I benefited from that theft. Maybe I was too young to stop it, but I'm not too young to make it right. I looked at this remarkable young man, this grandson I barely knew, who had somehow grown up with a moral compass despite his parents' example. What about your family? How are things? Home. His expression darkened. They're getting divorced. Dad moved out last month. Mom's working 3 jobs and still can't make ends meet. Emma's having a hard time with all of it. I'm sorry I'm not. They brought this on themselves. His voice was matter-of-fact, without anger or bitterness. They had a choice between treating you with respect and keeping their ATM. They chose the ATM and lost both. What will you do now? I'm graduating next month. Then going to community college in the fall. I'll live with a friend and work part-time to pay for school. He smiled. For the first time since arriving. I'm going to study nursing like you. My heart swelled with pride. Wonderful. Michael, I wanted to ask you something. Would it be okay if I called you sometimes or visited? You probably don't want anything to do with our family after everything that happened. But I was hoping maybe you'd give me a chance to prove I'm different. I looked at this young man who'd used his own money to find me, who'd taken responsibility for debts he didn't create, who'd chosen a career dedicated to helping others. He was nothing like his parents. He was everything I'd hoped he could become. I'd like that very much, I told him. We talked for 3 more hours about his plans for the future, about my new life in Harbor Point, about everything except the painful history that had brought us to this point. When he finally left, promising to call the following week, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope for the future. Not just for myself, but for the possibility that something good could grow from the wreckage of our family. As I watched his car drive away, I realized that Jessica's cruelty had inadvertently given me the greatest gift imaginable. It had forced me to discover my own worth, independent of what I could provide to others. I was no longer Linda, the ATM, Linda the enabler, Linda the doormat. I was simply Linda. The story continues in the next chapter in the next linked video. But first, I need you to subscribe to join the family as we are looking forward to hit our first 10,000 subscribers target, and feel free to share your story in the comments. You matter, your voice does too.